It's time to engage, educate, and empower with Tracey Maxfield.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Engage, Educate, and Empower, the podcast which aims to highlight the issues and challenges that our children, teenagers, and young adults face day in, day out. Each week, as you know, I have a very special guest and we discuss topics such as bullying, bullycide, mental health awareness, addictions, child abuse and neglect, mental illness and suicide, to name a few. Today, I have a very different guest. I'm going to be talking about something slightly different, what we normally talk about it, but I think it's extremely relevant. Her name is Jemima Abalogu, and she lives in Texas in the United States. And she is currently the Youth Justice Ambassador at the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. There, she works alongside her colleagues advocating for students in Texas. And the reason why I wanted her on the show is because I read a report that she co-authored along with Alicia Castillo, who is the TCJC's youth policy analyst, called Reversing the Pipeline to Prison in Texas, Ensuring Safe Students and Safe Schools. It's an amazing article, and I found that so much in it actually made sense with regards to how we can help kids that are being bullied and the bullies themselves. So right now, Jemima is a senior at Westlake High School in Austin, Texas. And what I want to talk to her about not only is about the report, why they wrote it and what they found, but also how so many things that they identified in the report can also speak to the bullying that takes place globally, but especially in Texas. I know in many schools they're having a significant problem. So we'll break for a very quick commercial, 30 seconds long, and when we return, for the first time, I'm actually going to meet with and speak with Jemima. Stay tuned.
Tracey Maxfield is a retired nurse with over 36 years' experience in mental health and dementia. She has spent years studying, researching, and writing on dementia care, mental illness, and bullying in teenagers. Tracey struggled with chronic depression starting in her 20s, and after years of intense workplace stress, bullying, and harassment, her chronic depression intensified. Tracey wrote her book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, My Journey Through Depression, as a way not to only relieve her stress and anxiety, but to help her friends and family better understand depression. The book became an international guide for mental health awareness, allowing Tracey to focus her attention on helping children, teenagers, and their parents work through mental health issues and bullying. She travels all over the world to meet with schools, mental health advocates, and experts in the mental health fields. She also offers online courses to help children, teenagers, and their parents work through issues, bringing families closer and to bring awareness to bullying in society. For more information on Tracey, her mission, the show, Tracey's book, and offered courses, visit traceymaxfield.com. You can see the latest news on mental health, upcoming guests on the podcast, read Tracey's blogs and articles, and more. Plus, follow Tracey all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube to watch the podcasts. See her daily messages and motivation and learn about each podcast guest and experts. Plus, while you're on the website at traceymaxfield.com, be sure to sign up for the free monthly newsletter. Follow Tracey with her upcoming events, interviews, seasonal tips, and the latest articles discussing important mental health topics and issues. And when you subscribe, you'll get a free copy of Tracey's booklet, Why Our Kids Are Suffering and How We Can Help Them. Just go to traceymaxfield.com. Tracey is committed to bringing parents and their children closer, to battle bullying and bring awareness to the mental health of children. That's why Tracey is offering her online courses to any adults, parents, children, and teenagers struggling during those hard times. Sign up for the course at traceymaxfield.com. You'll receive 8 full modules, over 12 videos, resources, and support discussing mental health, mood disorders, eating disorders, behavioral disorders, social media, drugs, suicide, risks and signs, and much, much more. Plus, you'll get access to Tracey's private Facebook group for individuals going through the same thing you are. Connect with others and share ideas, support, and motivation with Tracey helping along the way. Tracey's online courses is now for a limited time available for only $158. See all information online at traceymaxfield.com, where a brighter future is possible.
Welcome back, everybody. And as promised, I'd like to introduce you to a very special guest, Jemima Abalogu from Texas. Welcome, Jemima. I'm thrilled that you've agreed to be on my show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, you co-authored a very, very profound and very enlightening report. And so I'd like to ask you, what prompted the research and the decision to prepare this report?
Well, overall, kind of in Texas over the past couple of years, especially at the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, we've really kind of been pushing towards education reform and really looking into what is the student's everyday, day-to-day life like. So I actually came to the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. And I came on as a policy associate or an intern. And basically there, every intern is kind of given their own project or just a field of research to study. And restorative justice was my field. And throughout kind of that summer, I started kind of digging into what restorative justice is and what restorative practices are. And we found that it was not only more complex, but a lot deeper, and it had so much potential to really help Texas students that I was invited to stay on as the Youth Justice Ambassador, and we decided to just kind of go all in and really look into what restorative justice can look like for students in Texas.
Okay, so in a nutshell, for obviously there's people watching this that are wondering, I wonder what was going on in Texas. I actually gave the title of the report. So basically, when we have students that are dropping out of school, that have discipline problems, that are not doing well, they're not being supported and nurtured right now. And so they kind of drop out of school and they kind of are left to their own devices. And problem is most of them end up in the juvenile system or end up in prison. And so this report was to look at, is there a way we can kind of help them? Because we know, and from all the podcasts I've done with guests, that, there's always a reason behind a student's behavior. Be it a mental illness, bullying, an addiction, child abuse, neglect, all of those family issues, all of those play a role. And so if we're not helping support the student when they're acting out and helping them address what's going on, it kind of leads down a slippery slope. And we know that, homelessness, criminal activity, addiction, substance abuse, joining a gang, are lots of things that can happen, but ending up in the prison system is a very, very high risk factor, more so, I think, in the United Kingdom and in the United States compared to some other countries. So I love the term restorative justice because to me, zero tolerance just does not work. It doesn't matter in what avenue, in what forum you implement zero tolerance, it does not work. And so give a little capsule of what exactly restorative justice means.
Well, basically, restorative justice is almost an alternative to what students are experiencing now, which is zero tolerance. And zero tolerance is kind of just very punitive, harsh policies that have no room for kind of context or circumstance. They're basically saying, if you mess up, you're in trouble, no questions asked. Whereas restorative justice, it's more of this disciplinary practice that really seeks to repair harm by addressing the root cause of the student's conduct. which ultimately mitigates the likelihood of their behavior recurring. And it oftentimes involves like a restorative justice, coordinator, or just a teacher or a coach who will kind of work with that student to really understand why the behavior occurred and to help mitigate the harm directly towards the person who was harmed. So it really isn't, it aims more to isolate the student. It aims more to isolate the behavior rather than isolate the student.
Right. But it also holds the student accountable for the behaviors, which
so.
I think is important. Like they're not getting a free pass, but holding them accountable and then supporting them does have more positive. See, now you got me stammering my words. That's more positive benefits. So, as you were working on the report, what kind of things did you notice? Were there specific themes that you kept noticing over and over again?
Well, a big thing we noticed was to really understand restorative justice, we really focused on understanding zero tolerance first, because that is the current policy that a lot of Texas students are finding that they're facing. And we found that zero tolerance is basically in no way effective. No. It isn't really claiming to do any of the things that it is claiming to do. We found a lot of times that zero tolerance is more of a crutch for schools who are afraid that if they venture out into new policies or really kind of reform their disciplinary kind of programs, they're afraid that that will push more onto teachers who already have so much on their plate, which is something that we were trying to really aim to understand. But we also find that zero tolerance is really implemented very unevenly across the board. It mainly targets Black and brown students, students of color, and students with disabilities. And even though they are smaller percentages of the student population, they are much more likely to be affected by these policies, which then leads down into the school to prison pipeline, where once a student is referred, suspended, or expelled, or basically whenever they come into contact with the juvenile justice system, they're much less likely to go on and further their education or even graduate high school and go on to higher education. So we found that with restorative justice, the biggest thing was that students were feeling heard. They were really feeling like this was something that aimed to help them, not hurt them. And it really was more rehabilitative rather than very punitive and very harsh. And we found that it really kind of helped communities come together rather than pushing a student completely out of a community. And we also found that the most surprising thing, at least on my part, was that it's very natural that for teachers, they don't feel like they have so much to do and it is just another thing on their never-ending list of tasks to get done. It feels like it's more of a culture and a mind shift rather than it is kind of like a chore. So for a lot of teachers, they find that it's actually easier to run their classrooms. And for a lot of students, they find that they actually want to be in the classroom. Whereas with zero tolerance, we just find that teachers are stressed and students just don't want to come to school.
That's true. Yes, that's awesome. As I said, I love that idea. And the reason why I love the report so much was because, as we know, many schools implement zero tolerance when it comes to bullying.
Yes.
And to me, even just implementing some of what you discovered and you recommend in your report when we're dealing with bullying behavior could have so much more beneficial effects, because not only will the victim receive help, but the bully. And people seem to forget that a bully needs help, because if you don't understand what's driving them to this type of behavior, then bullies have a very, very high risk, again, of ending up in the prison system, of turning to criminal activity, dropping out of school, and employment homelessness. So I love the concept of restorative justice. Now, with the students that this was trialed with, what was their feedback when they began the program?
So while we were researching, we had the opportunity to visit 3 great schools in Texas that are implementing restorative campuses and have kind of restorative programs within their schools. And one thing we found was one school that we visited in Houston, we found that students really felt responsible for their actions. They really felt like they could come to school and somebody would care about them and would care about what was happening in their lives. Now, the way they were kind of running their program was that they had a youth ambassador training system where it was really a youth run and a youth led program. So the restorative justice coordinator there, her name is Dr. Anita Wadwa. Basically how she ran it was she was just coordinator and she ran the class, but she basically provided trauma-informed care to help these students out emotionally.
Right.
And then those students were constantly in restorative circles and constantly in restorative spaces, learning the rules and kind of the values of restorative justice. And then those students were tasked with going into their communities within their school and going into the classroom and running those circles and running those programs for other students. So we find that restorative justice is finally a program that really centers students in this kind of in the world that is supposed to be all about students.
Right.
And we found that students really just want us to ask them why. As a student myself, like what I hear from my peers and what I've heard from being able to talk to these students is that everyone has something going on in their own life. And when you finally sit a student down and you ask why, instead of how could you or something in an accusatory manner, you'll find that a lot of times there's a bigger, deeper issue behind the behavior that you're aiming to solve. So when you can find that root cause, like restorative justice aims to do, you can ultimately mitigate that behavior, but also help that student improve their life as well.
So after you conducted this study, what were the positive gains? Like, do you have statistics or do you have actual numbers which reflected there was a significant difference, maybe in disciplinary action or, students who remained on in school instead of dropping out?
Well, it's hard to give exact numbers just because
Right.
a lot of schools, there's a big discrepancy in schools kind of reporting of suspension and expulsion and those kind of numbers. But what we have found is that students and teachers are reporting that there are less suspensions, there are less expulsions, and there are less referrals overall to the juvenile justice system. And an amazing thing that we did find for a school in San Antonio is I think we're averaging almost about 60 fights within a year. There were so many fights happening at the school that it was almost a weekly occurrence. And now with this school year, so far, they've only seen about 3 fights.
That's
and that
awesome.
is because they've implemented something called a peace room with the restorative justice coordinator. They've worked with a local organization there to really kind of work with students and understand why is the behavior happening. Again, that why, instead of just suspending and expelling those students. And you can see the very tangible results that when students feel heard, they're more accountable to themselves and they're more accountable to their communities. And thus they won't feel the need to act out in these ways because they feel like there is somewhere where they can go where they can feel heard.
Absolutely. And as I said, I love that because the more we validate what's going on in the student's life and help support them, the more accountability they take for their own actions, but also the filter effect of wanting to help other people, and it helps them grow as a person. Now, you mentioned restorative circles and peace circles.
Yes.
Can you give me an idea? What do you mean by those?
Yes. So a big staple of kind of most restorative justice programs is something called a restorative circle. And basically that's almost like a check-in space. It's a big space of communication. So it specifically in the Houston program that I mentioned earlier, what they did is with their youth ambassadors, every day they would sit down in class and they would sit in a circle and everyone would be allowed to just give a couple words, give a few phrases about how they were doing and what they were experiencing, and kind of rate their moods on a scale of 1 to 10, or just give a phrase or a few words about what their mood was for that day. And a lot of times that's the first part of it. So a lot of times the first step is checking in and really understanding the mood of students. But then it goes deeper to talk about what's happening in their communities, what they feel. It's really a space where it gives students the option to speak up about things, and also just to speak to the issues that they see in their communities or that they're experiencing themselves. And a big part of this is the values. It's called the values of circle. So oftentimes there's a talking stick or some sort of talking
Right.
piece
Yes.
that is used so that students don't talk over each other. And it's also a judgment-free area. And students understand that what is said in circle stays in circle.
That's good.
So it's really just a space where the only rule is that unless someone hears of harm being done to someone else or harm being done to the student, that is the only thing that is reported or kind of spoken out about outside of circle. So it's really just a place for students to really understand themselves and understand their peers. And the biggest part is that that's a place solely for the students. Adults are often required to sit in things, but it's also that if you're in the circle, you're participating in circle. So adults can't really just stand in the room and listen. If you're in the room, you're participating. So it's a place for everybody in the community to participate in that kind of restorative atmosphere where everyone is talking about what they've experienced, what they see, and kind of what they would like to do going forward.
Okay, so an example would be, so if there's a particular student who's having conflict with the teacher, and it's become quite fraught and tense, in that circle, would the teacher then that's involved participate?
Yeah, so that is actually a practice called victim offender mediation.
Okay.
So that is when kind of the person who has been harmed and the person who has kind of perpetrated that behavior are taken together with a mediator and kind of made to sit down and just talk about that why and talk about what actually happened and talked about what they expect going forward. So that's a space for the student or whoever has really caused the harm. A lot of times it can also be a teacher who can be kind of classified as the offender as well. But it's just a space for whoever has been directly involved in that harm can really just speak face to face and really kind of understand the why and kind of going forward what the expectations are. So victim offender mediation really is a way to sit down face to face to really discuss with one another with mediation how you can kind of move forward and how you can be in community with each other without having to isolate one certain person.
Okay. Now, as a student, most of them obviously would be classified as underage, and so what role then do the parents play? If it's a teacher-student situation, is it just the student and the teacher who would meet with the mediator, or is there an additional meeting where the parents are then present?
It kind of depends from program to program. A big thing about restorative justice is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all.
Okay.
It really is. It's something that takes a lot of effort, and it's something that needs to be implemented over many years. On average, we're seeing that it takes about 5 to 6 years for it to be fully implemented and to fully see kind of the capabilities of the programs. But we find that a lot of times it starts with the student, and then it is oftentimes the student's choice whether or not to get the family involved. So we find that in a lot of restorative spaces, it's a very trauma-informed kind of based way of care. So we find sometimes that the parents are kind of a root of some sort of issue. So we don't immediately jump to taking the parents in. But if the student chooses and feels comfortable with it and it is deemed appropriate kind of by the restorative justice coordinator and in that space of communication, then families are often invited to be involved. And we found that a lot of times it is a very natural step to include family and to include parents. But it isn't in that role of kind of the authority figure who will come in and kind of further this discipline. It's more of in that familial kind of, you are a person who is very close to the student, so we'd like you to hear how the student is feeling, and we'd like you to kind of hear why they think that they kind of acted in this way. So it's different from almost like a parent-teacher conference that many students are used to, where the teacher is just speaking solely to the parents. It's very much more of an open communication style, where if the student deems that they feel that it is necessary, or the restorative justice coordinator feels that it's necessary, or it just feels like a natural step, then parents are always invited into the circle.
Now, you said invitation is at the discretion of whatever's happening at that moment, and obviously the seriousness of the offense.
Yes.
With restorative justice, if there is a situation, say, between a teacher and a student, does the school automatically notify the parents and explain that their child is or teenager is now, part of the restorative justice program, and that they will keep them updated, but they don't necessarily need to be involved at this stage? I'm just wondering about legalities.
Yeah, so of course it is a school environment and it does kind of depend on the seriousness of the offense, but oftentimes that is kind of the route that it takes, is that a parent is notified, but they don't necessarily have to be involved.
Okay.
So a lot of times, like there's one school that we visited in Austin where they are practicing kind of a fully restorative campus, but their restorative justice program is really for students specifically who have kind of perpetrated some sort of misbehavior or infraction. So once a student has kind of been deemed to be needing to be placed in the restorative justice program, they are not separated from the community, but they are put in a fully restorative environment where they are in that classroom with the restorative justice coordinator all day, and they have a very kind of strict schedule to kind of help them work through their behavior and kind of take those steps towards taking accountability for their actions. So parents are usually notified in the beginning of that just to make sure that they're up to date of what is happening with their students, but they're not necessarily kind of forced or kind of asked to be directly involved in that process at that moment.
Right. No, and that's good. And I like the idea that the student is not excluded, because I think as soon as we start implementing exclusion, that's when things go awry, and it always leads to a slippery slope. So I think it's always important to maintain that environment as best as possible. So that's awesome. Now, reading the report, it's interesting. I mean, you obviously know that, but I'll grab my book here. It said in Texas from 2017 to 2018, children in foster care from pre-kindergarten to second grade were 3 times more likely than their peers to be suspended. That was, and I have guests coming on to talk about the challenges that happens. We know foster care, again, very, very difficult. And then in 2015 to 2016 in Texas alone, 63,874 children from pre-kindergarten through 5th grade received an out-of-school suspension. Mm-hmm. That just blows my mind, because they're so young. I'm not making excuses for adolescents, but teens are going through so much and they're becoming their own people. And I can understand why they may act out. And sometimes it may get physical. But pre-kindergarten through 5th grade is so very sad. And that shapes them immediately. Suspended once at that young an age, their whole trust and even, their ability to be able to respect the school environment is going to be tarnished. So when you were going to the different schools, what grades primarily did you work with?
We did primarily kind of work with high schoolers, because we found that we worked with high schoolers and some middle schoolers as well. But we find in regards to restorative campuses that we've spoken to, it is something that has to be implemented across the board. And the earlier you implement it, the more natural it becomes. And one high school that we talked to, which was actually founded as a restorative campus just a couple years ago, and this year is actually, or last year was their first graduating high school class, they find that once you implement it very early on, it just becomes natural for kids. And the biggest thing we found is that zero tolerance just fundamentally goes against child development. It just doesn't work with who kids naturally are and who they're growing up to be. And we found that as soon as it's kind of implemented in elementary school and kids are in those situations where they're suspended or that they're just removed from school entirely, that it's almost like putting a label on them. And it's almost like putting this prophecy on them that often kids feel like, well, if you're going to call me a bad kid, if you're going to call me this and that, then okay, I'll be
Yes.
It just becomes this prophecy and this self-repeating dangerous cycle where kids felt like no one cares about them, so they don't care about school, they don't care about themselves, and it's dangerous for kids' mental health, and it's dangerous
Yes.
for kind of communities in general, because we're losing our next generation.
Oh.
We're losing the people who are our future. And once we start using things like restorative justice, we find that it works with development, and it works on a case-by-case basis instead of just laying down this very restrictive law where circumstance can't be taken account of. And it is really tailored, like I said, it's really tailored towards that school's culture. So we find that programs really do differ from school to school because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Of course.
And it really takes this top-down commitment from administration and from school boards to really say, we're going to funnel resources into this, and we're committed to this because we trust the results and we trust kind of the research we've seen. Because there really isn't any research that backs up zero tolerance.
Right.
But we're starting to see study after study after study and reports like ours that really say restorative justice is the way to go because the facts just back it up.
I agree. Now, sorry, I wasn't giving you the finger. It's what I've done. My nose was scratching. Sorry. So, have you noticed as you were, talking to students and going to the different schools, as the restorative justice was being implemented, there was more respect among students?
Yes, 100%. I think once you begin to kind of, at first, of course, with any new policy or with anything new for students, it takes a little bit of time. Yes. It takes time because students are so used to so many things being thrown at them and so many things being labeled as the so-called miracle cure for all of the issues in their communities. And eventually, as you get older, you just kind of become apathetic and you say, okay, you've done this so many times. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll figure out the next program 6 months later.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, with that top-down commitment, if you have the people who are in charge of your school district and in charge, who are really leaders in their community saying, no, this is something that we're committed to, this is something that we're really going to put time and effort into, students realize, oh, I do like this better. I do really appreciate it. And it's not something that is short-term. It's something that really is a cultural, and it's a mind shift. It is something that is almost like a lifestyle for students.
Exactly.
So once they kind of get into it, and once they realize that once it's done properly, and they realize that it's something that's here to stay, and they figure out that they are at the center of this concern, and that they are at the center, and their voices are being utilized, and they're being allowed to be in these positions of leadership, and they're really being given the responsibility and the ownership over their communities, students love it. It just really is, it's very natural for them. And it finally feels like they're being heard and valued.
And I think I keep stressing this every time I do my blog and my YouTube video, is teenagers, students, they need to be listened, and they need their voices to be heard, not just ignored or whatever. And they need to be involved. I mean, they have very, very insightful, out of the box ideas that maybe an adult would not even think of, and they need to be involved in their community, because it is their community today, and it will be 10 years, 20 years from now. And we've really got to give them the best chance, the best possible chance, because, I mean, it's not a nice world out there right now. And there's so much coming down which kind of scares so many kids, global warming, and then we've got the migration and riots and civil war, and even the coronavirus, and everyone hypes it to such extremes that, I've spoken to so many teenagers, and they all say they don't even know if there's a future world that will be waiting for them. And so we've got to give them that opportunity to kind of help construct their future on, the way that they see it. So as I said, I can't speak more highly of restorative justice. I absolutely love it. It needs to go like across the board, because as I mentioned to you earlier, I see so many benefits. Once you implement restorative justice, it will have a positive impact on bullying. which, as we know, has become the new epidemic in schools. And so many schools have the zero tolerance. And so it ends up that the bully and the victim, or even an upstander who went to support the victim, all become involved in something, and they're all penalized. There's no opportunity to sit down and look at everything that happened. And with restorative justice, I like that whilst you're holding people accountable, there's the opportunity to kind of dissect what happened and how can we change this. And I also think it would change the school culture, knowing that from the top down, they actually care and they're involved with you, and that there will be action, and we will support you as well, because I think not a lot of schools reflect that, sadly. And sometimes some of the students are allowed to run the schools, for want of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a big kind of misconception about restorative justice, especially in Texas, is that it's soft on students and that it's really just letting students get away with whatever they want. But restorative justice programs, they're oftentimes a lot harder than zero tolerance policies, because it's really forcing a student to kind of sit down and say, why did I do that?
Exactly.
Why did I do that? What were the effects of my actions? And was that the right thing to do? And if not, how can I help the harm that I've caused? And how can I make sure that I better myself and that my community is better for it?
No, I agree. And I always support, let's deal with the problems upstream before they come downstream to the catastrophes, because if, zero tolerance does not address the core issues which has resulted in the student's behavior. And at least restorative justice opens that door that the student may actually need counseling. The student may be in a very abusive home situation and actually needs help. And if we're able to identify and help the student, it enables them to grow and actually become a much better person, because now the adult community has identified and is helping them. Whereas with zero justice, they're not listening. No one cares. So it just fuels the no one cares about me. I'll show them I'm no good. Well, I'm going to be the bad boy. And it's not helping. And so, no, I do not think it's soft. I think it's a respectful approach.
Exactly. It's humane is really what it is.
Yes, it is.
Students are so, especially in Texas, and I think all over the United States, students are so used to just kind of being ignored and being put through the ringer and just really being told that you need to sit down and you need to be quiet and you need to do your work and then eventually you'll get out of here. When in reality, students are living their lives just like everybody else, and they're dealing with things and they're dealing with issues and they have emotions. And a big thing is that restorative justice is really just a trauma-informed based method of care, whereas zero tolerance is not. And zero tolerance has no room for kids who have been in abusive homes, or kids who are in the foster care system, or kids who have disabilities, or kids who have chronic illness. Zero tolerance has really taken the humanity out of schools, where you're just dealing with a bunch of small humans. And restorative justice really just looks at students and says, you matter. And we care about you, and we want to hear what's going on in your life, because we want you to be able to succeed, and we don't want to just put you away and say you're bad so you don't deserve anything, or you did a bad thing so you are a bad person. Restorative justice says you can do a bad thing, but as long as you take accountability and as long as you are responsible for your actions, by no means are you a bad person. We just have to all do better for each other.
No, I agree. And everything that happens in life is a learning opportunity. I mean, even as adults. And I think the sooner that we're able to get kids and teenagers to start thinking like that, they're better equipped to navigate life as an adult, because curveballs are going to be coming at them right, left, and center. And so I think, restorative justice also helps them to develop really good coping skills and strategies and problem solving behaviors, because identifying what's their core issue opens them up to healing. And also, as I said before, it's being that better person of understanding that they have a role. And as you said, we care, you are valued. Not enough kids today hear that. Mm-hmm. And, it's a shame, because yes, they are our future generation. They're also our present generation, and they can do so much to help us today, which will pave the way for a better future.
Yes, exactly. And one of the biggest things about restorative justice is that it really just helps everybody involved. Yes. It's not only better emotionally, but it's better economically. We find that communities just save a lot of money because you don't have to imprison these students. Like, you don't have to deal with higher rates of crime. You don't have to fund kind of this prison system that in itself is so inhumane. And we find that for students, it just works for them. And while it's hard, like, as I said, it's not something that is an overnight cure. It really takes a good amount of effort, and it really takes that top-down commitment, and it takes resources. But once you establish it, it's something that is just a self-maintained system. It's something that students latch onto and teachers latch onto, and that the community latches onto, because it is just human nature for restorative justice to work. It really is.
No, I absolutely agree. And as I said, I'm one of the biggest fans. It's awesome, and I love it. And I would like every school implemented this, we would see such a change.
Yes, we would.
In behaviors, in everything. Because first and foremost, as you said, students need to be heard. They need to know they matter, and they need to be valued. Yeah. And this is what, restorative justice does. So, Jemima, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I loved hearing about the work that you're doing. And what's next for you?
Well, right now I am a senior in high school, so I'm trying to graduate high school, which I will hopefully do in a couple of months. And then I am off to college for the next 4 years. And I'm planning to major in political science and social policy, so that I myself can become a lawyer and do things like the amazing Alicia Castillo and Lindsay Linder, who I work with at the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. So more education is up next for me.
And that's awesome, because kudos to you and good luck. We need more people like you. And this is, the whole aim of the podcast is to make a difference. And you are doing that. And I think everyone that's going to be watching this podcast are going to have that aha moment. And, certainly go to your PTA meetings, go to your communities, go to your schools and say, you should read this report. We're going to have the link actually for them to read the report. You should read this. I love this idea. Have you thought about implementing this? Because I think you'll see a huge turnaround in what goes on at the school with restorative justice. So Jemima, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick commercial break, and you'll see all the social media links and the link to the report. So please do catch up and connect with Jemima. And Jemima, good luck. I'm sure you're absolutely awesome. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Jemima Abalogu is a senior at Westlake High School in Austin, Texas, and having an interest in criminal justice reform, published the study Reversing the Pipeline to Prison in Texas and How to Ensure Safe Schools and Safe Students. The study was published with the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, and Jemima became the first ever Youth Justice Ambassador for the TCJC. There, she works alongside with colleagues advocating for students in Texas. Her, along with the rest of the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition team, makes recommendations for Texas schools and school districts, along with the Texas Legislature and the Texas Education Agency. In Jemima's report, she's hopeful that Texas can begin reversing the school-to-prison pipeline and make both the schools and students safer. Make sure to visit her on social media, along with check out the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition Facebook page at facebook.com/TexasCJC. You can also find Jemima's report on reversing the pipeline to prison at texascjc.org.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you're going to check out the links, and please do read the report. It is lengthy, but you can cut certain pieces and get to the part where they define restorative justice and the positive effects, and see if you can talk to your school district, your school board, about the possibility of implementing it, because it does change lives. So I've really hoped you've enjoyed today's podcast. And my parting words today, as Jemima said, students need to be heard. Children, teenagers, young adults, they need to be heard because they have a voice and they have an opinion, and they also have some really great ideas. And if we respectfully listen and involve them in planning, in maybe formulating new ideas, policies, their contribution is significantly beneficial, because if we help them make plans in the present, then it only means that there's a better future for all of us. So thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Engage, Educate and Empower. And I'll be back again, same time, same place next week. Have a good week, everybody.